Great. Yeah, and that's a nice link actually. Yeah, if there are any questions, could you add them to the chat box? And then John and I, we can respond to those questions as they come in, and can follow up on any other questions that are outstanding at the end of the webinar also. So just before we begin, just I suppose a couple of little rules. If everybody could switch off their microphones and their videos, that would just help in case of any issues with bandwidth and stop any interruptions. That would be great. Yeah, as I said before, I'm going to be recording this webinar. And yeah, and if you could add any questions to the chat box. Okay, so I'll now begin John's talk on setting up a Cooking Diaries study.
Hi, my name's John Leary. I'm a researcher with the MECS program based at Loughborough University in Gamos. Today, I'll be taking you through the second of the MECS Eco webinar series on setting up a cooking diary study. This webinar will cover three main areas: recording data, getting the right people, and enumerator and participant training. In recording data, we'll look at the trade-offs between energy meters and data loggers, and between paper forms and COBO Toolbox. We'll then go through how you can categorize the dishes on the local menu and how this relates to electric appliance selection. Then we'll go through the registration survey. In getting the right people, we'll look at the selection of participants, paying particular attention to the wiring and safety issues, and we'll also look at how you recruit the right enumerators to make the study run smoothly. So there are two main types of energy meter that you can use in a cooking diary study. We've got the plug-in energy meter, which can record the amount of electrical energy used to prepare each dish or each meal, and the data logger, which continuously records electricity consumption readings to create a load profile for cooking energy demand. In terms of verifying the data, the plug-in energy meter has the weakness that participants may forget or may record an incorrect value, meaning that you get holes in the data set. However, participants and enumerators can verify the data as they record or check diary entries. In contrast, the data logger is prone to errors in recording if the data isn't verified until the end of the study. However, some models can transmit the data directly to a server, meaning that it can be verified continuously. In terms of data analysis, the plug-in energy meter creates a summary of data. Readings are recorded by the participants side by side with the qualitative data. However, the data logger creates a separate data set that then has to be matched with the cooking diary data, the qualitative data later on. Can you just use plug-in energy meters? Yes. This is how we did it in Cooking Diaries 2.0 in Kenya, Zambia, Tanzania, and Myanmar. However, the downside is that you often have holes in your data set where people have forgotten to record, or have recorded an incorrect value. The data logger is much more reliable in terms of giving you a more complete data set, assuming it does its job of recording continuously. We have yet to find a data logger that we 100% trust to record good quality data. In the first cooking diary study that we did in Kenya, for example, we used data loggers, and we got to the end of the study, found that they hadn't recorded the energy readings properly and had to redo the whole study. So what we actually recommend now is actually using both the data logger and the plug-in energy meter, so that you've got a backup there, so that if one doesn't work, you've got the data from the other side. The data logger won't be affected by noise from other non-cooking appliances, such as lights or TV, unless you plug those into the data logger itself. So if you have an extension cable, for example, coming out of the plug-in energy meter, and you plug in the TV and you plug in your cooking device side by side, then the reading that you get off of that will be the consumption of the TV plus the cooking device. However, if they're plugged in elsewhere in the house, they shouldn't affect the readings on the data logger or the plug-in energy meter. How do you choose the right one? Well, the plug-in energy meter for the Cooking Diary study must have a live display of kilowatt hours consumed. And this should have an accuracy of at least 0.01 kilowatt hours. Should be able to support the rated power of the appliance or appliances on trial for at least 1 hour continuously without overheating. So we recommend a minimum of 3 kilowatts rated power. Ideally, it should also have a display that is easy to read and be easy to reset to 0 for each meal. To find plug-in energy meters, you can check local availability. However, they may have to be imported. So you can check online retailers, for example, Amazon, or electrical hardware suppliers. The data logger for the Cooking Diary study must measure time series power or energy data with resolutions of at least 50 watts and 1 minute. It shouldn't require a Wi-Fi connection. You'll find a lot of smart plugs designed for smart home networks, which do much of what we would like them to do in the Cooking Diary study, but they fail to record data when they're not connected to a Wi-Fi network. It must not lose data when unplugged or during a blackout, and a data logger should store several months of data on the device so that if you're not able to visit participating households for some time during the less intensive data collection periods, then the data will still be there waiting for you when you come back. It should also enable enumerators to easily download the data via Bluetooth, SD card, or USB so that they can verify the data in the field. And it should also come with some software that makes that verification easier. To find a data logger, again, check local availability, but it's likely that they'll have to be imported. You could contact local research institutions that have experience on energy monitoring projects, for example, in Nepal, CAPEG, or in Kenya, ED Advisory or Coyote, or you can contact international data logger specialists directly. These include Geocene, H2EI, who make the meter that you see in the picture there, Spark Meter, and NextLeaf. For further recommendations for data loggers, check out the Cooking Diaries protocol, and a list of data logger specialists will be uploaded to the Echo shared folders. We're happy to make introductions to those data logger specialists. Whilst conventional diaries are written down on paper, there's now a modern alternative that we highly recommend that you use, computer-assisted personal interviewing. So we really like the COBO Toolbox platform because it's a free, open source digital data collection platform that's designed for use in humanitarian and development settings. How it works is you design a questionnaire on their web interface, and then enumerators download the questionnaire and go to the field with the questionnaire loaded onto an Android smartphone or tablet. When they're interviewing the participating households, then they record the responses onto the smartphone and tablet. When they get back from the field, when they have internet connectivity again, they upload the data onto the COBO server. Then anyone, anywhere in the world, can see all the responses to the questionnaire from all the enumerators when they log onto the COBO server. The key benefits of this are that it cuts out the time-consuming and error-prone data entry stage. So don't worry, it doesn't require an internet connection when collecting the data, and the data can be verified and corrected on the go, just like with a paper form. So you don't actually have to design your own questionnaire, and you can use the one that we already designed for you. And you can find those on the Echo shared folder. You will need to do some adaptation though, for example, changing the foods that are on there to locally appropriate foods. And we can show you, I'll talk a bit about that later in the webinar. Unfortunately, you can't currently use COBO Toolbox on an Apple phone or tablet, only Android. The Cooking Diaries records detailed qualitative data on what it is that people cook and how. And one of the key things is what dishes are people cooking. So we need to think carefully about what options we give people to make sure that the responses that we're giving us fit into categories that make sense. This enables us to ensure that the data that we collect shows the compatibility of the cooking appliances that we're trialing with cooking practices as clearly as possible. So how do we go about this? Well, we start by identifying the most popular local dishes. Typically, this will be 10 to 20 dishes, emphasizing how frequently they're cooked at home and the typical preparation techniques over other factors such as the key ingredients. The next step is to record the recipes for each dish and then to categorize the recipes, focusing on the cooking processes, for example, boiling or frying, the cooking time for each process, any unusual practices that are used, for example, vigorous stirring or the requirement for specific pan shapes, and typically you'd end up with 4 to 8 categories. Here's an example of how not to do categorization. Many people will instinctively group together foods that have the same main ingredient, such as meat, pilau, rice with meat, meat samosa, meat stew. However, looking at this diagram here, you can see that they actually use very different cooking processes and have very different cooking times. Pilau with rice and meat requires boiling, some shallow frying and a bit of toasting, whereas samosas require deep frying, some shallow frying and toasting. So an appliance that cooks pilau well may well not cook meat samosas well, and vice versa. For the Cooking Diaries study, it makes more sense to group foods by cooking processes and time. For example, this is a set of foods commonly cooked in East Africa that we've grouped together as heavy foods because they all require a lot of boiling and then a little bit of frying. You may also want to consider any unusual practices. For example, if there's a specific dish that requires half an hour of boiling, such as rice, but there's another, such as ugali or pap, that requires half an hour of boiling but vigorous stirring, you may want to separate them into 2 different categories. So there's an additional opportunity for collecting more data that can help build the evidence base for why the appliances you're trialing are a good match with local cooking practices. You may want to consider holding a participatory cooking session where you test a range of appliances, including yours, with one dish from each of the identified food categories. You can measure energy consumption, time, and participants' experience of both usability and taste. Alternatively, you could create a scorecard for each appliance and rate how well it performs each cooking process. Here's an example of an appliance scorecard. The scores can refer to energy efficiency, cooking time, user experience, or anything else you think is particularly important. And each appliance is scored for each cooking process. We can then match this up with the food categories and see which appliances cook which category of food best. For example, here we can see that the EPC is best at boiling, but it can also do shallow frying. So it's a really good match with the heavy foods that we saw in East Africa. The registration survey helps us to understand what types of households are participating in the study. Each enumerator collects basic household information, such as the contact details, simple demographic data, cooking devices and the utensils owned by participating households, and how much they're spending on cooking fuels currently. So there's an example registration survey programmed into COBO Toolbox on the Echo Shared folder, and also a paper registration survey that's an appendix in the Kenya Cooking Diaries working paper. Getting the right enumerators is absolutely critical for a successful cooking diary study. Enumerators visit households every day during the intensive cooking diary phases to interview the participants about what they have cooked and how. So they're the eyes and ears of the study on the ground, and they're responsible for ensuring that participants have a positive experience during the study. If they don't, then there's a real probability that they will drop out. Enumerators should be personable, polite, encouraging, and supportive. They should also be well educated, in particular with regards to literacy and numeracy. And they should also speak the local language and be familiar with local foods and cooking techniques. We recommend 5 households per enumerator. An enumerator can visit more. However, the time to travel between households and to start up a conversation with a new cook and other members of the household each time tend to take up a significant amount of time. So if the households are all neighbours and the households are well motivated and they're recording good quality data and the enumerator is very efficient, then yes, they can definitely monitor more than 5 households in one go. But from experience, we found that the quality of the data recorded does decrease significantly if households are spread too thinly amongst more households. So once you've recruited enumerators, then here's an example of how you could set up a training process. This is how it was done in the Cooking Diary study in Tanzania, trialing EPCs on mini-grids. It was a 3-day program that was partly defined by the travel schedule of the lead field researcher. In day 1, in the morning, then they started by going through what data is needed for the Cooking Diary study, talking through what's on the menu and categorizing the dishes as we discussed earlier. Then they looked at how the data will be connected. In the afternoon, focusing on the fuel and time measurements, and then finishing with training on the COBO platform. On day 2, then they began with training on the interviews for the Cooking Diary questionnaires, with the enumerators interviewing each other and entering data into COBO. Then training on how to operate the COBO platform in terms of saving the forms, sending and editing forms in case any mistakes are made in the field. And finally, completing the registration surveys with participants. In the afternoon, they moved on to assigning households to enumerators, 5 households to each enumerator. And then they asked enumerators to interview the participants with a lead field researcher monitoring. On day 3, then the enumerators visited the participating households in the morning, and in the afternoon, they uploaded that data to COBO and reviewed it for inconsistencies with the trainers. So a full example training schedule from this project is available in the Echo shared folder. And the training should be led by the lead field researcher, who plays a key role in this study, making sure all the different parts are connected and all of the data that is produced is of the highest quality possible. So how do you select the right participants? Well, the Cooking Diary studies require motivated and capable households. So we recommend using convenient sampling to prioritize recording high quality data over getting a nationally representative sample. Convenient sampling is when your sampling method has no criteria other than the people that are participating are available and willing. The qualities of the most ideal households include having one main cook who is well organized, literate, and very interested in the findings of the research study. This is important because you need a lot of motivation to be able to participate and continue recording high quality data over a longer period of time. Ideally, they should be cooking 2 to 3 times a day, or whatever is typical from that community, rather than regularly buying food out or eating at a friend or family member's place, which will reduce the amount of data you get from that household. Incentives are an important topic because it is a lot of hard work recording this data, so it's important to incentivize participants. However, giving regular cash incentives can be an issue if you're looking at willingness to pay, because if you're regularly giving people more money, then this increases the amount of money they have to spend on cooking. So, as an alternative, you could either consider giving the cash incentive at the end of the study, or you could consider giving common household goods, such as soap. But be careful not to use food, as that could affect the menu choices. Safety is absolutely critical in the Cooking Diary study. All wiring, plug adapters, extension cables, and sockets in use in participating households should be inspected and then tested to verify that they're strong enough for cooking. So the thickness of the cables and the quality of the wiring junctions, the sockets and the plug adapters should be visually inspected first of all and upgraded if necessary. And then it should be tested by plugging in all the cooking devices that you're going to be using during the study and operating them at full power for at least 1 hour under full supervision, so that if any problems do occur, then you can sort them out whilst you're still there. Any unsafe wiring junctions or sockets should be replaced before the Cooking Diary studies. So the quality of electricity supply is really important to bear in mind when you're selecting participant households. It's really important to understand how severe blackouts and brownouts or voltage dips are in the target community. However, if there are extended blackouts or brownouts during the data collection period, then this is going to severely limit the size of your data set. So we would recommend that you select households that tell you that their electricity supply is reasonably stable, and that if there are blackouts, they continue to record data on what it is that they do during that blackout or brownout. For example, do they wait until the electricity supply comes back to a usable level, or do they go back to their original fuels or appliances? So here is an example participant training process, and this is from the same project as the enumerator training process that I showed earlier. And it's actually very similar, following the same schedule, apart from on day 2, then it's the participants who record data in their own home overnight, being advised that the enumerators will visit tomorrow. And then on day 3, then that data is the data that is recorded by the enumerator in the interview. So one additional thing to note is that we've designed an extra form, a paper form, that's to be used by participants in between interviews. So whilst you have certain types of data, for example, the dishes that were cooked, the number of people that you cooked for, that are very easy to remember, then there are other types of data, such as the energy readings from plug-in energy meters, or the time you started and finished cooking, that are a bit more difficult to remember. So we recommend writing those down on either a notepad form, like the one that you'll find on the Echo shared folder, or simply instructing participants to write this on a notebook or a scrap of paper of their choice, and making sure that they're recording somewhere those difficult to remember pieces of data. So that's the end of our webinar here. Thanks to everyone for listening, and we welcome any questions.
You're muted, Richard.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much, John, for providing that talk, and that's a really good insight into many of the things and the issues and things to consider when setting up a Cooking Diaries study. Yeah, there's been a few questions that have come in, which we've tried to address, and maybe just one point on the last slide is that in the training process for the enumerators and participants, in that particular study, which was conducted in Tanzania, the training of the enumerators and participants was synchronized, which is something you may want to consider, but you know, it depends on the circumstances of your projects and what would work best. Apologies, some people have noted that the audio was a little bit quiet. We're sorry for that. We tried it out, we thought it was going to be okay, but we'll make sure that's addressed for the next webinar in 2 weeks' time. Please feel free to add any further questions you might have to the chat box. We've had a few come in during the talk. John, I don't know if there was anything you wanted to highlight or add in addition to the comments you made to those questions.
Yeah, I think Amaya made a really good point about sorry, there's a bit of echo there.
Oh, sorry, that's me.
Thanks. Yeah, Amaya made a really good point about, does the use of data loggers or plug-in energy meters change the cooking practices of the participants? And I think my response to that was that I would be surprised if using data loggers made much of a change in people's cooking practices. But using plug-in energy meters, I think, is much more likely to, because you're physically reading that value off the meter each time. So you become much more aware of how much energy you're using and how much you're spending. So in the past, many of our studies have involved doing subsidizing the cost of electricity. In the early days, we really wanted to just find out how much electricity is needed to cook foods in a particular culture. So we were just trying to get data in the easiest way possible, and we subsidized the cost of electricity for the participants. So it didn't really matter that much whether people were using 2 kilowatt hours or 0.2 kilowatt hours to cook their stew. However, if they're paying for that electricity and they're writing down each time exactly how much they're using, it may well make them much more conscious of how much they're using and cause them to reduce the amount of energy that they're using compared to if they were unaware.
Okay, thanks. So the use of plug-in meters can actually be a behavior changing, have behavior changing effects.
Absolutely, yeah, and we use it that way deliberately in live cooking demonstrations, and we often use plug-in energy meters to show people how much energy they are using, because generally the perception is the other way around, that people often think that electricity is too expensive to use for cooking. So we simply plug in the plug-in energy meter and show people how much we've used to cook the dish that we serve them. And in general, people are very surprised at how little it costs.
Yeah, I mean, and that was really came out in some of the findings that you documented in the Kenya e-cookbook.
Yeah, I think it's a really powerful tool, and I know it's something that IDEA are using in Cambodia as well. So it's something that I would really encourage you to use more in the marketing stage of your eco project, to really try and tackle that perception that electricity is too expensive for cooking.
Thanks. Do we have any? Does anybody else have any further questions that they'd like to add? Oh, yeah, we've got a question there from Ashma. For how long should we collect data to get an idea of local cooking practice? Is there a standard duration for that? Maybe I can address that in terms of eco, and John, if you've got any other comments to add afterwards. So this is something that we will be covering in the next webinar, where we focus specifically on data collection. As an example, the eco projects are 6 months long, and an example we have in mind is that you might spend 3 to 4 weeks on a baseline survey, followed by 4 weeks on what we're calling a transition phase, which involves an intensive cooking diaries phase where you introduce the new electric appliances. But the cooking diaries is a very intensive study, so it would be, we think, unreasonable to try and do this over 6 months. So we would then follow that with 3 months of a lighter cooking diaries phase, which is far less intensive. And then finally, for the final 4 weeks, another intensive cooking diary phase, which we call the end-line phase, and that enables us to compare the before and after. But we will be going into much more detail about that in the next webinar. And yeah, and that is an example, but of course, you know, there may need to be adaptations tailored to your project.
Yeah, I think Amaya's just building upon his point from earlier. I think another thing that's worth mentioning is Agnes from Jaconi Magic, who's on the call now. Then her previous project before Eco was about using plug-in energy meters to popularize smart cooking solutions, such as cooking with an electric pressure cooker, and really packaging those two devices together, the electric pressure cooker and the energy meter, so that you can really give people reassurance on a consistent basis that they're not going to end up with a crazy electricity bill.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, I'll give it a minute or so just in case anybody else has any further questions before wrapping up.
Can I ask a question?
John? Oh, yes, yeah.
Let's tackle John Barton's question. Can you point us to the COBO data logging system, please? So COBO is not a data logging system. COBO Toolbox is a platform for data collection, which is a form of computer-aided personal interviewing software. So what it is it's an online platform whereby you can develop your own questionnaires, and then enumerators from your study can download that questionnaire onto their smartphone, take it to the field, and then when they're interviewing someone, capture the responses in the smartphone, and when they get back from the field, upload the data onto the COBO Toolbox server. So I can put the link into the chat, but just before I do that, I wanted to ask a question to the group. And John, you may be a very good person to respond to this actually, because we have yet to find a data logger that we are completely comfortable with, that we would be happy leaving in a household for several months at a time and be very confident that when we come back, the data is all there, ready and waiting for us. So we have a list of a few different data logger suppliers that we have worked with to some degree in the past, but we would be very happy to hear from you if you have any recommendations of other data logger suppliers that we should make contact with, companies that you've worked with in the past and you've been happy with the quality of their products.
Sorry, no, I don't. It's an issue for us, and the data logging is actually the responsibility of De Montfort University in the MECS project. Yeah, we'll be very happy to compare notes and compare lists. Yeah, and one of the technical issues is the energy used by the data logger itself, yeah, especially in off-grid systems. It would have to have its own large solar panel and battery to power the data logger.
Yeah, not necessarily, but anyway, let's take that discussion further and after the call. And what we're going to do is we're going to assemble a list of data logger manufacturers that we can put you in touch with, of companies that we have begun to establish a relationship with, and we would be very happy to introduce you to those companies and to see whether they can provide a solution for the project that you're doing now. So that's something we'll upload into the Eco shared folder.
Thanks, John.
Great, thanks.
There's also a question here by Surendra. What are the main criteria for selection of participation as well as selection of enumerators? So earlier in the slides, we mentioned some of the key criteria for enumerators, namely that they've got to have good personal skills, because they really are, the quality of enumerators is really, really important to how easy or difficult the study is to do, that they need to be educated, literate, numerate, familiar with the local cooking practices and the appliances being used, and speak the local languages. In terms of participant selection, so in the previous studies, we found that convenience sampling has been most effective essentially because the Cooking Diaries is an intensive study, and there is a lot involved in it. The willingness and the interest of participants to take part is really, really key. So yeah, those are the main findings that we've had so far. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, John.
Sorry, I was battling the questions on the chat there. I think you're muted, Richard.
I have, yes.
So we've got a question here about which energy meter do you suggest to use in Nepal? Well, I think we have an organization on the call who is already experienced with Cooking Diaries in Nepal, who's done several rounds of this already, or a partnership of organizations. So we've got PEDA, CAPEG, and the University of Bristol, who've now done 2 Cooking Diary studies using, first of all, plug-in energy meters and also using data loggers. They will be a valuable resource, and I would highly recommend you getting in touch with them. So we've got Kimon from CAPEG on the call. We've also got Biraj, I assume Biraj is here. And I understand that there's already been a call between the eco winners in the pool, so you should already be in touch with them. I highly recommend you reaching out to them. And the same applies for other eco winners in other countries. If you're aware of a local research institution who has carried out similar studies where they've recorded energy use, not necessarily for cooking, but perhaps for other purposes too, it's really worth reaching out to them and capturing their experience of what technology they use, or whether they would recommend that technology going forward.
Okay, thanks, John. So just to let you know, all the questions that have come in, I will be creating a questions and answers document that I will circulate. So there will be a record of it. And of course, this chat box will remain on the meetings team joining address, so you'll be able to access it as and when you like. I think perhaps we can end there, but please feel free to add additional questions to the chat box, or you can email me if you prefer, and myself and John will continue to monitor the chat box. And yes, I've just seen from Charles, are the slides available alongside the recording? Yep, all the slides will be made available, and I will send you a link and also put them on the Eco shared folder. Okay, I think that brings us to the end. I'd just like to say thanks very much to John for providing the talk today, for being here to answer some of the questions that have come in, and yeah, for all the efforts towards the MECS program and the Eco project, and to thank everybody else for joining and for all your questions, and for making this I think a good interactive and productive learning tool. So thanks very much. And just to flag up that in 2 Wednesdays time, 2 weeks time, we will have the next Eco webinar, which will be on data collection, and Anna Clements, who has undertaken a field cooking diary study in Tanzania. She will be providing the audio for that talk. So look forward to seeing you then, and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Richard. See you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nice.